The first thing Silas Thorne saw when he rode into the dusty outpost of Mercy's End was the woman with his dead wife's eyes, staring at him from the shaded boardwalk with the cold calculation of a gunslinger sizing up her next target. He froze. 1 foot still in his stirrup, the late afternoon sun a molten smear on the horizon behind the ragged cluster of buildings. For a dizzying second, 20 years vanished. He was back in the high country, and Elara was smiling at him, her green eyes flecked with gold like sun through aspen leaves. But this woman's gaze held no smile. It was flinty, guarded, and it was fixed on the silver marshal's star pinned to his worn duster. She leaned against a post outside the ramshackle telegraph office, her posture deceptively relaxed. She was dressed for hard travel, a man's brown trousers tucked into scuffed boots, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest that showed the polished grip of a Colt Navy revolver. A wide-brimmed hat shaded her face, but nothing could obscure those eyes. Elara's eyes. Silas dismounted slowly, the ache in his right knee a souvenir from a long-ago fall flaring as he landed. He was 58, and the miles hung on him like a second coat. He'd come to Mercy's End chasing whispers. A shadowy figure known as the Wraith was moving a shipment of stolen army repeating rifles through the territory. Using the labyrinth of abandoned mining claims in the nearby Bloodstone Hills, it was his last job before retirement. A final knot to tie. You'd be Marshal Thorne, the woman said. Her voice was lower than Elara's, rasped by trail dust and something else a lifetime of caution. I would be, Silas replied, looping his bay gelding's reins over the hitching rail. The air smelled of sage, hot pine, and the distant metallic tang of a coming storm. And you are? Rylan Holt. She didn't offer a hand. I hear you're looking for a guide who knows the hills, the old claims. The place is not on any map. He studied her. She was younger than he first thought, maybe around 30. Fine lines etched the corners of those familiar eyes, lines born of squinting into sun and wind, not laughter. Her dark brown hair, the color of rich soil, was braided tightly and coiled at her nape. She had Elara's stubborn chin, but her mouth was thinner, set in a firm, unsmiling line. The resemblance was a punch to his gut, a ghost he couldn't afford to entertain. I need someone who knows the terrain, not just the trails, Silas said, forcing business into his tone. It's dangerous work. The man I'm after is no rustler stealing cattle. He's killed. A ghost of a smile touched Rylan's lips, but it didn't warm her eyes. I know danger, Marshal. And I know the Bloodstone Hills like I know the scars on my own hands. My price is $40, half now. We leave at first light. The weather's turning. The high passes will be mud in a day. Her efficiency was jarring. Silas had expected some grizzled old prospector, not this severe, unsettling echo of his past. But his options were few. The local men had all made excuses, their fear of the Wraith palpable. 20 now, he countered. 30, she said, unmoving. Deal. He counted out the coins. Her fingers, brushing his palm, were calloused and strong. She tucked the money away without looking at it. I have questions for the townsfolk, Silas said. Meet me at the livery at dawn. Rylan gave a short nod, pushed off the post, and walked away, her boot heels thumping softly on the warped wood. Silas watched her go, a strange tightness in his chest. It was just coincidence, a trick of the heart and the harsh light. Elara was gone, lost to a river's rage months after he'd left to serve as a territorial marshal, their infant daughter with her. The letter from his sister-in-law had found him 6 weeks late. The fever took the baby. Elara drowned trying to get help. I'm sorry, Silas. There was nothing to bury. He'd buried his heart instead. That night, in his rented room above the saloon, Silas cleaned his Winchester rifle by lamplight. The wind moaned through the cracks in the wall, carrying the smell of damp earth. Downstairs, the tinny piano played a mournful tune. He tried to focus on the case, the rifles, the Wraith's known associates, but his mind kept returning to Rylan Holt, her eyes. The way she held herself, a coiled readiness he recognized from a lifetime of dealing with outlaws and desperate men. Yet there was a profound weariness in her, too, a solitude that mirrored his own. At dawn, the world was washed in shades of gray and dripping with a soft, cold rain. Rylan was waiting at the livery beside a sturdy steel-dust mar, a pack mule already loaded. She wore a slicker, her hat pulled low. "The Stone Creek Basin," she said without preamble as he mounted. "That's where I'd move goods if I didn't want to be seen. Old mine shafts for storage, a single trail, and that's easy to defend." "You sound sure." "I've spent time there," was all she said, nudging her horse forward. They rode in silence for hours, leaving the scant grassland for steep, pine-clad slopes studded with jagged outcrops of rust-red rock, the Bloodstone. The rain softened to a mist that beaded on their clothes and the horses' manes. Silas found himself watching her. The way she scanned the tree line, not like a hunter, but like someone expecting an ambush. The deliberate, economical way she moved at a narrow creek crossing, his bay slipped on the mossy stones. Silas cursed, gripping the saddle horn. Before he could steady himself, Rylan was there, her hand on the bay's bridle, her voice a low, steady murmur that calmed the animal instantly. "Easy now. You're all right." She looked up at Silas, her face close. In the damp, misty light, he saw a small, pale scar cutting through her left eyebrow. Elara had had a scar there, from a childhood tumble from an apple tree. A memory, vivid and brutal, flashed. Elara, laughing, pointing to the little cut. "Now we match, my brave lawman." He'd had one from a barroom brawl. His breath hitched. That scar. Rylan's eyes shuddered instantly. She released the bridle and stepped back, the moment severed. "Everyone has scars out here, Marshal. Watch your footing." She turned her horse and splashed across the creek, leaving him alone in the middle of the stream, the cold water swirling around his boots, a deeper chill settling in his soul. Coincidence upon coincidence was beginning to feel like the faint, deliberate pattern of a trap. But who was the hunter and who was the prey? He touched the cold metal of his star, a habit for reassurance, and followed the woman who was a stranger, yet felt like a walking, breathing fragment of his deepest regret, up into the shrouded, waiting hills. By midday, the mist had burned away, revealing a sky of hard porcelain blue. They climbed higher, the air growing thin and sharp. The trail was a faint scratch on the mountainside, weaving through stands of quaking aspen whose leaves whispered secrets in the breeze. The silence between them was a tangible thing, thick with unspoken questions. Rylan rode ahead, her back straight, never looking back to check on him. It was a show of either supreme confidence or profound indifference. Silas used the time to study the land. The Bloodstone Hills were a jagged maze, perfect for concealment. He saw why she'd chosen Stone Creek Basin. It was a natural fortress. He finally broke the quiet as they paused to let the horses drink from a crystal-clear spring. "You know this land better than any map. Born here?" She didn't look at him, filling her canteen. "No, came here later. Family?" "None to speak of." Her tone was a closed door. "A husband? Children?" He didn't know why he was pushing. It was unprofessional. But the need to know, to find a crack in her story that would explain away the haunting resemblance, was overwhelming. Rylan stood up swiftly, corking her canteen with a firm thwack. "The past is a country I don't visit, Marshal. I guide, you hunt. That's the transaction. My private geography is none of your concern." Her words were clipped, final. But in the brief glance she shot him, he didn't see anger. He saw raw, startling pain, quickly veiled. They made camp that evening in a small, sheltered meadow ringed by ancient gnarled pines. A clear creek gurgled nearby. Rylan worked with silent competence, gathering dry wood, starting a small, smokeless fire, unpacking bedrolls with a distance between them that felt like a canyon. She produced a pair of jackrabbits from her saddlebag, skinned and cleaned with swift, practiced strokes. Soon, the savory smell of roasting meat filled the clearing. Silas sipped bitter coffee from a tin cup, watching the firelight play on her face, the scar on her brow, the set of her jaw, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so achingly like Elara's that his throat closed. "I had a wife once," he heard himself say. The words pulled from him by the lonely darkness and the shared fire. "She had eyes like yours, green with little gold specks, like sunlight through leaves." Rylan's hand stilled. She didn't look up from the rabbit she was turning on a spit. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks toward the stars. "Lots of people have green eyes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She died a long time ago." He hadn't spoken of Elara to anyone in years. The words felt rusty, foreign on his tongue. "Our daughter died with her, fever." For the first time, Rylan looked directly at him across the flames. Her face was a mask, but her eyes were turbulent, a stormy sea. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "That's a heavy weight to carry." "You carry it." "Or it carries you," Silas murmured, an old piece of wisdom he'd learned too well. She handed him a tin plate with a portion of rabbit and a hard biscuit. Their fingers brushed again. This time, she didn't pull away immediately. "Why the law, Marshal? After a loss like that?" Seemed like a way to make the world make a little more sense. To put some order to the chaos. He took a bite, the meat tender and flavorful. "What about you? Why the solitary life? Guiding men like me into places most avoid?" She poked at the fire with a stick, the embers glowing. "It's a life where you only have to depend on yourself. Where promises don't get broken by others." She paused, then added, almost to herself, "And sometimes you're looking for something you can't name." Later, with the fire banked and the vast, star-splattered sky pressing down, Silas lay awake. The mournful cry of a distant coyote echoed through the hills. He heard the soft, rhythmic sound of Rylan's whetstone sliding along the blade of her knife. It was a soothing, homely sound, one that tugged at a buried memory of safety. His mind drifted to the worn, oilcloth-wrapped packet in his saddlebag. The only things he had left of them, a tintype of Elara, faded and blurry, and a tiny, hand-stitched baby bonnet, yellowed with age. He hadn't looked at them in a decade. The pain had been too fresh, then too fossilized. Now, because of this woman, it was alive again, throbbing like a new wound. A sudden sound snapped him to full alert, the sharp crack of a breaking branch too close. He reached for his Winchester. "Don't move." Rylan's voice was a feather-soft breath in the dark. She was already on her feet, a shadow against the deeper black of the trees, her Colt in her hand. She wasn't looking into the camp, but out into the surrounding woods. Silas froze, listening. The night insects had fallen silent. The horses stamped nervously. Then a voice called out from the trees, rough and arrogant. "Evening, folks. Smelled your fire. We're just passing through, friendly-like." 3 men materialized at the edge of the firelight's glow. They were hard-faced, poorly armed, but their eyes glittered with a desperate avarice that was more dangerous than any weapon. They were not the Wraith's men. They were scavengers, drawn by the smoke. "You're passing through now," Rylan said, her voice flat and cold as a gun barrel. "Keep walking." The lead man, a brute with a matted beard, grinned, showing broken teeth. "Now that ain't hospitable." We're hungry. And that's a fine-looking Mari you got." His eyes slid to Silas. "And you? Old-timer, you look like you might have a pension on you." Silas rose slowly to his feet. His Winchester held loosely but pointedly. "You've made a mistake, boys. The only thing you'll get here is a one-way ticket to Boot Hill." The tension stretched, taut as a bowstring. The bearded man's hand twitched toward the rusty pistol at his hip. It happened faster than Silas could follow. Rylan didn't fire. She took 2 swift steps forward and drove the heavy barrel of her Colt into the man's temple with a sickening thud. He dropped like a sack of grain. Before his companions could react, she had the gun leveled at the second man's face, her other hand holding a second, smaller derringer that seemed to appear from her sleeve, aimed at the third. "The next sound I want to hear," she said, her voice still terrifyingly calm, "is you two dragging this garbage out of my camp. Then you will disappear. If I see you again, I won't be gentle." The men, white-faced and utterly disabused of their notions, scrambled to obey. They hauled their unconscious leader into the darkness, and the sounds of their frantic retreat soon faded. Rylan stood there for a moment, breathing steadily, then she uncocked her weapons and slid them back into their holsters. She walked back to her bedroll and sat down, picking up her whetstone as if nothing had happened. Silas stared at her, his heart hammering. Her speed, her ferocity, her sheer lethal competence. It was breathtaking. It was also familiar. He'd fought alongside men, tough veteran posses, but he'd never seen a display of such controlled, efficient violence. It wasn't the wild rage of an outlaw. It was the disciplined defense of someone who had learned, long ago and very well, how to survive in a world that gave no quarter. He finally found his voice. "Where did you learn to handle yourself like that?" She didn't look up from her knife. The whetstone hissed in the silence. When she finally spoke, her words were so quiet they were almost eaten by the crackle of the dying fire. "A man taught me. A man who wasn't there when I needed him to be. So I learned to be there for myself." She lay down, turning her back to him, signaling the conversation was over. Silas remained standing, the cold night air seeping into his bones. The words echoed in his mind, a cryptic confession that felt less like an answer and more like a key sliding into a lock he was terrified to turn. The ghost was no longer just in her eyes. It was in her skill, her solitude, her pain. And for the first time, the unthinkable thought, the impossible hope he had buried 2 decades ago, began to stir, fragile and terrifying, in the deepest part of his soul. The morning dawned cold and brittle, the air smelling of frost and pine resin. The encounter with the scavengers hung between them, an unspoken testament to Rylan's lethal capability. Silas watched her pack her bedroll with the same brisk, silent efficiency. Her movements economical as a sharpshooter's. The questions were a storm in his head, but her closed-off posture was a wall he couldn't breach. They broke camp and rode deeper into the Serpentine Canyon's. By mid-morning, they reached the rim of Stone Creek Basin. It was as Rylan had described, a huge bowl-shaped depression carpeted in scrub and shadowed by towering red cliffs. A silver thread of creek wound through its center. Dotting the cliffs were the black, gaping mouths of old mine adits, like sockets in a skull. "There," Rylan said, pointing with a gloved finger to the far northern end of the basin. A thin wisp of smoke, nearly invisible against the slate-gray rock, curled from a crevice not part of any main shaft. "A blind entrance. You'd miss it if you didn't know to look. That's your storeroom." Silas felt a jolt of professional focus pierce his personal fog. She was right. It was perfect. "We need to get closer. Find a vantage point." She led him along the treacherous rim, dismounting where the horses couldn't follow, and they crawled on their bellies to a lip of rock overlooking the basin and the hidden smoke source. Silas pulled a brass telescope from his coat. Through it, he saw two men lounging by the crevice entrance, rifles across their knees. The distinctive long, dark shapes of crates were just visible in the shadows behind them. Army rifles. That's it, he breathed. The Wraith's cache. He tracked the layout. One main trail in, steep and narrow, easy to defend. But Rylan had brought him a back way along the rim. They could observe, plan an approach with a U.S. Marshal's posse from the next town over. It was the break he needed. He lowered the glass, turning to her. "You've earned the rest of your pay, Miss Holt. More than. This is exactly what I needed." She was looking not at the cache, but at his hands as he collapsed the telescope. Specifically, at his left hand. A deep, ragged scar ran across the back of it, from a long-ago knife fight. "That scar," she said softly, echoing his words from the creek. "How did you get it?" The question, coming from her now, felt loaded. "A knife. In a saloon in Dodge City. A man didn't like being arrested." She nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the old wound. "My mother." She began, then stopped, swallowing hard. She looked out over the basin, her profile stark against the sky. "The man I told you about. The one who taught me to shoot, to fight. He had a scar like that. In the same place." A cold wave, different from the mountain chill, washed over Silas. The world seemed to tilt. Coincidence is a thin thread, he thought, and mine has just snapped. He remembered teaching a young, laughing Elara how to hold a derringer for protection years ago. The memory was a happy one. Could she have taught someone else? A daughter? A daughter who lived? His voice was a dry rustle. "Your mother." What was her name? Rylan's jaw tightened. She didn't answer for a long minute. When she did, it wasn't with a name. It was with a story, her eyes never leaving the distant smoke. She was the strongest person I ever knew. She was alone, raising me in a little sod house on the edge of nowhere. She'd get this faraway look sometimes, holding a little tin star she kept wrapped in a handkerchief. She told me stories about a brave lawman. She said he had a laugh that could shake the rafters and a heart too big for his own good. She said he was gone, but that he'd loved us. Rylan's voice hitched. She got sick. A fever. I was maybe 4. She bundled me up, tried to get to town through a spring flood. The river was high. She put me in a flour barrel, tied it shut with rope. Told me to hold on to the handle inside and not let go, no matter what. She pushed it into the current, toward a sandbar she could see. I remember her eyes, through the crack in the lid. So green, so scared. Then the water took her. Silas couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to the sound of her voice and the crushing weight of a truth he'd carried for 20 years, a truth that was wrong. I held on, Rylan whispered. A single tear tracing a clean path through the trail dust on her cheek. The barrel caught on the sandbar. A trapper found me the next day. My mother's body was found miles downstream. The trapper and his wife, they were kind. They raised me as theirs, gave me their name, Holt. They're gone now, too. The only thing I had from before was the tin star. I kept it. I asked, for years, about the lawman. But Thorne wasn't a name they knew out here. And I figured, if he was so brave, why didn't he ever come looking? The pain in her words was a physical blow. Silas felt the canyon floor drop away. The tin star. The cheap, souvenir-like star he'd bought at a carnival when Elara told him she was pregnant. He jokingly pinned it on her shawl. "Our first lawman," he'd said. "Elara," he choked out. The name was a prayer and a curse on the wind. Rylan finally turned her head to look at him. Her eyes, Elara's eyes, were pools of decades-old hurt and a dawning, horrified realization. "How do you know that name?" "The fever," Silas stammered, his own vision blurring. The letter said the fever took the baby, and Elara drowned. The letter was wrong, Rylan said, the words final as a judge's gavel. The baby lived. I lived. All the pieces, the eyes, the scar, the skills Elara might have taught a child, the loneliness, the searching slammed together with the force of a runaway locomotive. The ghost wasn't a ghost. She was flesh and blood, sitting 3 feet from him, her face a mirror of the woman he'd loved and the lost years he'd mourned. Rylan. He reached a trembling hand toward her, not knowing what he meant to do, touch her shoulder, her face, as if to prove she was real, but the moment shattered. A sharp crack echoed across the basin, followed by the unmistakable whine of a ricochet off the rock between them. Stone chips stung Silas's cheek. They'd been seen. Down. Rylan yelled, her instincts overriding the seismic emotional upheaval. She rolled, drawing her Colt in one fluid motion. 2 more shots rang out from a sniper's position on the opposite rim. The Wraith's men weren't just guarding the cache. They had lookouts covering the high ground. Their hidden vantage point was now a deadly trap. Silas scrambled back from the edge, his heart hammering for a whole new reason. The professional marshal took over, even as the stunned father reeled. "Back to the horses, go!" They belly crawled, then sprinted, zigzagging as bullets kicked up dirt and whined off stone around them. The sniper was a good shot, but the distance was extreme. They reached the horses, mounted in a frenzy of motion, and spurred them back down the narrow trail. The gunshots had stirred the hornet's nest. Shouts echoed from the basin below. They were no longer hunters. They were the hunted, their location compromised, their mission blown. And they were racing not just from armed outlaws, but from a truth so vast and painful it threatened to swallow them whole. They rode hard, putting distance between them and the basin, diving into a thick stand of pine that choked a side canyon. Only when the sound of pursuit faded behind them did they slow, their horses lathered and blowing out in the deep, green gloom of the pines. They finally stopped. The silence was heavy, broken only by the horses' heaving breaths and the drumbeat of Silas's own blood in his ears. He looked at Rylan. She was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white on the reins. The tear track had dried, leaving a faint line on her skin. The tough, solitary guide was gone. In her place was a woman who had just excavated a foundational grief and found a living ghost of her own. "You're her," he said, the words barely audible. "You're my daughter." She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She just sat her saddle, trembling slightly, as if the world had just been ripped out from under her. The outlaws were coming. The Wraith would be alerted. They were in imminent danger. But for a suspended moment, all that existed was the terrifying, beautiful, and devastating space between a father and a daughter who had found each other on a cliff edge, with bullets in the air and 20 years of lost time screaming in the wind. The silence in the pine grove was deafening, a solid thing pressing in on them. Rylan finally moved, dismounting with stiff mechanical motions. She walked a few paces away, her back to him, one hand braced against the rough bark of a massive ponderosa. Her shoulders were rigid. Silas stayed in the saddle, feeling unmoored, adrift in a sea of shock and sorrow so profound it was dizzying. "My daughter," the words were a bell tolling in his soul, each peal vibrating with a different note: joy, anguish, regret, a furious, helpless love. He saw the little girl in the flour barrel, the woman learning to shoot from a memory of her mother, the solitary guide building a life on the bedrock of abandonment. His abandonment, however unintentional. "I looked," he said, the words raw. "When I got the letter, I went to where it happened. I searched the riverbanks for days. I asked every farm and trapper's cabin for 50 miles. They told me. Everyone told me no one survived. The river was too high. I found a tiny grave marker your aunt had put up with both your names." I believed it. The confession poured out of him, a plea for understanding. Rylan didn't turn. "I was 4. I had a fever. The trapper who found me, Ephraim Holt, he was a private man. Wanted no trouble, no questions. They moved deep into these hills not long after. By the time I was old enough to ask the right questions, the trail was stone cold." Her voice was flat, emptied of emotion, which was worse than any anger. "You were a story my mother told me. Then you were a ghost. Then you were a man who chose a star over his family." "No," Silas breathed, the old wound tearing open. "It wasn't like that. I was young, proud. I thought providing, making a name, that was how I protected you. I was going to send for you both when I had a permanent post. The letter came before I could." He slid from his horse, his knees buckling slightly as he landed. "Rylan, look at me, please." Slowly, she turned. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now, burning with a complex fire. "Why are you telling me this now? What does it change? We have men with rifles hunting us." "It changes everything," he said, taking a step toward her. "Because for 20 years I've been a walking dead man. And now I see I have a reason to live. You are my reason." A flicker of something pain, longing crossed her features, but she hardened again. "Sentiments won't stop bullets, Marshal. The Wraith knows we've seen his cache. He'll move it, or he'll come for us to silence us. We need to get to Redemption. Wire for your posse. It's a full day's hard ride, and they'll be on our trail." She was right. The professional, survivalist part of her had re-engaged, a lifeline in the emotional tsunami. Silas forced his own marshal's mind to focus. The personal would have to wait. Survival came first. If they were to have any future to unravel their past, they had to live through the present. "We can't take the main trail back," he said, his mind clicking over maps. "They'll expect that. Is there another way? Longer, harder, but unseen?" Rylan studied him for a long moment, assessing not the father, but the partner in this fight. Finally, she gave a curt nod. "The Ghost Pass. It's not a pass. It's a series of ledges and chimneys through the cliff bands north of here. The horses won't make it. We go on foot from here, turn them loose. It'll take us most of the night, and it's dangerous." "Then that's our road," Silas said. They quickly stripped the essentials from their saddles' food. Water, ammunition, Silas's rifle, Rylan's pack. With a slap on the rump, they sent the confused horses trotting back down the trail they'd come, a false lead for anyone tracking. Then, shouldering their burdens, they followed Rylan into a crack in the cliff face that was invisible until you were upon it. The Ghost Pass was a brutal, grueling journey. They climbed by fading light and then by the cold glow of a half moon. Up narrow ledges where one misstep meant 100-foot drop. Through chilly waterfalls that soaked them to the skin. Chimneying up fissures in the rock where the world was reduced to the press of stone on their backs and the burning in their thighs. There was no room for talk, only gasped instructions and shared hands up difficult pitches dot in those hours of shared, silent struggle. Something else began to bridge the chasm between them. It wasn't words, but actions. The way Silas anchored a rope for her descent. The way Rylan pointed out a secure handhold he'd missed. The shared canteen in a moonlit crevice, their breath pluming in the cold air. It was a primal, necessary trust built not on history, but on the immediate need to keep each other alive. As dawn tinged the eastern sky with rose and amber, they emerged from the high rocks onto a wooded slope overlooking the sparse lights of Redemption, a mining supply town still asleep in the valley below. They were exhausted, bruised, and shivering, but they were ahead of the pursuit. They found a hidden overlook and huddled in the lee of a boulder, sharing the last of the jerky. The immediate danger had receded, and the enormity of the night's other journey settled back upon them. Silas reached into his inner coat pocket, his fingers numb. He pulled out the oilcloth packet. With reverent, clumsy hands, he unfolded it. There, in the gray dawnlight, was the faded tintype of Elara smiling her sun-through aspen smile. And beside it, the tiny, yellowed baby bonnet. Rylan's breath caught. She stared at the items as if they were holy relics. Slowly, she reached out. She didn't touch the picture, but her fingertips, cold and scratched, brushed the delicate stitching of the bonnet. "She made this," Rylan whispered, a dam breaking in her voice. "I remember. The feel of it. The smell of her." Tears finally spilled freely down Silas's weathered cheeks. "She loved you more than anything. She was so brave. Just like you." Rylan looked from the bonnet to his face, really looking, perhaps for the first time. She saw the scar on his hand. She saw the grief etched into every line, a mirror of her own. She saw the desperate, hopeful love in his eyes. "I hated you," she confessed, the words a soft admission. "For so long. It was easier than the hurt." "I know," he said. "I think I hated myself a little too. The man who taught me to shoot. The story she told? It was you. All along it was you." She wasn't just stating a fact. She was reconciling two halves of her soul, the abandoned child and the daughter of a man her mother had loved enough to remember with a tin star. He nodded, unable to speak. Below them, the town was waking. Smoke began to curl from chimneys. They had a job to finish. Silas took a deep, shuddering breath. "I need to send that wire. End this. Then I would like, if you would allow it, to try to know you. However, you'll have me." Rylan was silent for a long time, watching the sunrise paint the valley in gold. She folded the oilcloth gently over the treasures and handed it back to him. Not a rejection, but an acknowledgement that some histories were too fragile to hold just yet. "First," she said, standing and brushing the dirt from her trousers, her voice gaining a new, steadier quality, "let's catch this wraith, together." A faint, tentative smile touched Silas's lips. It felt strange on his face, like a muscle long unused. Together, they made their way down into redemption. The telegraph wire was sent, a coded message to the Marshal's office that would bring a cavalry of lawmen down on the Bloodstone Hills. They bought hot coffee and waited on the boardwalk. Outside the telegraph office, watching the street come to life, the past was a canyon between them, deep and shadowed with loss. It wouldn't be crossed in a day or with easy words. There were 20 years of birthdays, Christmases, skinned knees, and heartbreaks to mourn. There was anger to be weathered, trust to be painstakingly built. But as they stood there, side by side, two solitary figures who had found an echo of themselves in the other's eyes, a new path was beginning to form. It wasn't the path of a ghost-haunted marshal or a lonely guide. It was the rough, uncharted trail of a father and a daughter, starting their journey not from the beginning, but from a hard-won middle, with the whole uncertain, precious future stretching out before them under the wide, forgiving sky of a new day. The lost had been found not in a desert, but in the high, broken heart of the mountains, and in redemption they began at last to come home.